My guest today is Rory Buck. The topic that I challenged him with and the title of this show that maybe has got you here is The Right Time. He has a number of different thoughts on this, which we jump into pretty much from the outset of the show. He's an incredibly intelligent guy. He has swum at highest levels, and he is an incredibly diverse coach. Although he will tell you in the show, he is not a life coach. He's a swimming coach, but he is a life coach in a way as well. He helps a number of different people. As we tackle this, what I thought was a really interesting topic of the right time. When do we know it's the right time? We hear a lot, the right time, the right place, knowing when to do something, knowing when not to do something. And that's the answer I try and get out of Rory. And over the next hour, we kind of get there, but maybe leave you a little bit more confused, but hopefully give you a few different ideas. One of the best things that I personally took from the show is how he speaks about windows of time where things could, should, or may happen. This week's announcements. What do I have for you, apart from the fact that I have cut my hair? I think I won't flatter myself and say by force or by popular demand, because that would mean that people care, but I did go for a haircut. That's not super important. However, it's important to me. I want to give a shout out this week to our partners in Ireland, InnerFight Endurance Ireland, Simon over there. I think once or twice before we've mentioned him on the podcast. If you're looking for endurance coaching anywhere really, but more specifically in Greystones in Ireland, give Simon a shout. Even if you're not looking for coaching, who cares? Give him a shout. He's a really nice guy. And at the other end of the globe, down in New Zealand, Zoe is down there. Give her a shout. InnerFight Endurance New Zealand, InnerFight Endurance Ireland, they would love to hear from you. On the flip side of the coin, in the CrossFit world, our team have qualified for the semi-finals, which is the next step towards the CrossFit Games. We've done a few shows in our time around CrossFit, so you guys know exactly how it works. Probably not. Still quite complicated. However, the guys will be going to Korea at the end of this month to represent InnerFight. CrossFit DXB is our official CrossFit name. Yes, we are a CrossFit affiliate. Have been for a while. We had a little sabbatical there, but we'll talk about that in another show. Matt, Sandro, Rachel, and Andy's wife, Vic, will be representing us all over in Korea in the semi-finals, and we wish them the best. We'll probably be talking a little bit more about them, or you'll be seeing a lot more of them in recent weeks as they go into their final preparations for the semi-finals. Talking about competitive fitness, last week we talked about Precision Games. Was it Precision Games? Yes, it was. Another big event on the calendar, on the fitness sort of circuit calendar, if you like, is the Turf Games, which takes place towards the end of November, probably the third or fourth weekend of November. It's a super fun competition. Last year it took place here in Dubai in Sports City, 2-day event. There's 2 different categories, elite and everyday, and we have entered, I think, 4 teams in that. So if you live in Dubai or if you want to represent us, you need to get in touch with Andy. He is handling all of that. I might have jumped the gun a little bit on that, but just give him a shout, am@innerfight.com. He would love to hear from you. And the final announcement we have from the day this show goes out, just 2 weeks before 2 big events for each side of our community, for the endurance side and also for the CrossFit side. Final Fridays will take place, as the name suggests, on the last Friday of the month, Friday the 26th, whilst also out in Al Qudra. Our endurance guys will go and do 50-50-50. It's quite straightforward. They just rock up and do it. It's awesome. 2 great events. If you want to get involved in some community stuff, give us a shout. winning@innerfight.com. We'll let you know how to get involved in either of them or maybe both of them. Could you compete in both? You could. You'd be a bit tight on time, but we could make it work. That is the announcements for this week. This is episode number 805 of the InnerFight podcast. No matter where you are in the world, thanks a lot for tuning in. Let's jump into today's show. Rory, welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate you having me.
Mate, I'm excited to fire this one. This one started with a random Instagram. I want to ask you, when I sent you that title, what did you think?
I think, first of all, an honor, privilege to come on and chat. So any opportunity to do that. And I think we've had some good conversations in the past. So I saw the title at the bottom and I was like, there's a lot of directions that we can go in, but I think that we can have some good conversation around it. And something that I've been working through myself over the last little while. So
so
pertinent.
It works.
Yeah, pertinent.
It's interesting, mate, because as I was saying before we sort of hit record, I've been trying to link people with titles for a while, and maybe this links in with this one, is that when I thought of this title, I immediately thought of you. So hopefully it works. Let's start there. What does the right time mean to you?
That has been something that I have thought about. I did a nice long swim this morning, trying to consolidate the thoughts that have come through over the last couple of days. And I think the first thing that came to my mind was something that I've struggled with for a long time, because I'm a thinker. So I spend a lot of time in my own head. And
Swimming.
Swimming, yeah. I mean, a lot of endurance stuff by myself. I also have I've struggled with black and white thinking. So when you say right time, you go, the first thing that comes to my mind is this categorical right or wrong. So there's right time and there's wrong time. And I think something that when that title comes up that we have to kind of work against is understanding that very seldom, very rarely do we have a right and a wrong. There's a window for most things. And I think we can take that from like nature, right?
Yeah.
Winter's not a good time to get a tan,
right?
But the middle day of summer is not the only day that you can go out in the sun, right? If you look at, I hesitate to go here, but it was an example that came up to me. Like, there isn't the perfect age for a woman to have children. There is a window. Like, try it too young, probably not a good idea from a social maturity standpoint. Try it too old and you may have some issues. Like, there's a window, right? Don't try and be an Olympian when you're 50. Like, there are right and wrong windows of time. So it kind of looks maybe like a bell curve. And so that was the first thing that came to my mind, is like right time, wrong time, right window, wrong window, I think is probably more appropriate.
So why do you think then, because it's quite a well-used phrase, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just not the right time.
Yeah.
So how do we then, do we re-educate society the Rory way? I mean, this is a pretty big call 3 minutes in, but you know, where do you think right time, wrong time, right time, wrong place, wrong time? Because and this will probably do lots of people's heads in, but when you start to think about it, you've heard this in the last month, and that's how I actually came with the title, because I actually used it with someone.
Yeah.
Right place, wrong time.
Yeah.
So where do you think it actually comes from? Probably should have Googled it, shouldn't I?
I have no idea where the phrase of speech came from. I think oftentimes there's a narrative that runs inside our head.
Yeah.
And we need words, stories, and justifications to support those narratives. I don't know where I heard it, but one of the most cynical things about excuses is that they're always valid, right? And if you think about that, it is in large part true. Yeah. Right? You could always go one more. You could always try something different. You could always. And there's plenty of reasons why you shouldn't and why you haven't. And many of those are often very valid.
Right.
And so one of the ways that I think we can justify or start to iterate on a story inside our heads to justify it is by referencing the time in our lives, the time of day, the time of whatever, that something occurs. And then we can start to fall in love with the story, run with the story, create the story.
Yeah.
I think that is probably whether it's factual, 100% material, or it's subjective, I think that's probably where it comes from.
So pinpointing a time would maybe give someone who, let's not blanket people, but someone who is struggling a little bit or just can't put things in place, if we actually give them that time rather than that window, then it guides them in a better way.
Yes.
Yes and no. Here
yes
we go.
No. I think to kind of go back to a couple more things that I was thinking about in the context of right time. I think we could separate right time to things that we're stepping into and things we're stepping away from, because those would typically be two things that we talk about, right? I didn't succeed, or I'm not stepping into this any further because it's not the right time. I'm not stepping away from this, or I am stepping away from this because it's not the right time. I want to resign. I'm not going to resign because it's not the right time. I want to do an Ironman. I'm not going to do an Ironman because it's not the right time, right? So we can step into things, we can step away from things, and the right time is kind of plays a role there. Now, I think that depending on whether you're stepping in or stepping away, there's going to be variables that influence whether it's the right time or the wrong time. Does that you kind of follow there?
It does, yeah.
And so I think I don't know, maybe should have researched, don't know if I could research what the demographic age group of the listeners of this podcast is. You probably have insights to that. I don't know if you want to share that insight. So I think, at least in my life, what I've noticed, I've tried to keep my life by design as simple as I possibly can. But I have the privilege of working with people from such a wide demographic and such a wide age range. My youngest client is 19. My oldest client is 64, 65. So that's a very big, broad spectrum. Something that is easy for me to pick up on is that the older we get, the longer life goes on, the more complexity gets built into our lives. And the more complexity we have, the more variables we have that influence whether or not right now is the right time or not to do something. And so I think that's particularly pertinent when we're stepping in, but it can also be pertinent when we're stepping away. To tell somebody who hates their job that, mate, just stop going to work. Do something that you love doing. Go and follow your passion. If he's got 3 kids and a mortgage, it's not the right time to step away from your job. Let's find something that, we can transition with. At the same time, somebody who steps into, I want to do an Ironman, by the way, my wife is pregnant and we're due in 3 months' time, probably not the right time, right? So as we gain these kind of, whereas you have somebody who's single, who kind of everything else is stable, there are no crazy variables, we have the opportunity to play, and then the right time doesn't really become a factor. So as you get older, the complexity grows, and as the complexity grows, I think there's more challenge in that right time window.
Let's jump into that thinking, mate. You do a similar job to what I do, to what we do here. You coach people, and we'll come on to your incredible background in swimming, but you're a swimming coach, but you're also an endurance coach as well. What process do you go through? Let's try and add a bit of practicality to this. We're quite sort of figuratively speaking. What is the process that we go through to figure out whether, a client comes to you with this goal, is it the right time or isn't it the right time? You mentioned a couple of good examples there, but I'm interested to see what you work through with someone, because surely that is one of your skill set is amazing, but to deploy your skill set on someone, the time has to be correct for them.
Right.
So how do you figure that out in the early stages?
I think that's a conversation that we have had before, right? And it's a really good question. I think the first starting point is trying to get a reading on self-awareness. So how aware is the person that I'm working with right now? How aware are they? Self-aware and of the context of their life, where their life is at in terms of the complexity and the variables that are involved, and then their awareness of what they're stepping into or what they're signing up for or what they're are going to go about. So monitoring or measuring, getting a reading on how self-aware are we at this point. Couple ways that we can do that. I think one of the simplest one, if we're talking just in the context of endurance sport, but I think it helps. one of the questions that I'll ask people is, what's the biggest challenge you've ever taken on? What's the thing you're most proud of? How long did that take you to complete? What was the experience like? And you can tell quite a lot as people kind of explain where their understanding of what they're stepping into, because you have a framework of what it takes to do an ultra, right? You know what the sort of mindset is, you know what the requirements are going to be from a physical perspective and from a mental perspective and from a time perspective. And you can kind of gauge that if somebody says getting through high school was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And I mean, legit, that's for some people the hardest thing you'll ever have to do. But if I don't know, if you've gone on to do some really challenging, and some of the responses I've got have just been incredible. The CEOs that have grown stuff, moms that have had to handle really difficult situations with children, with family dynamics. Like, you get a good reading of kind of where people are at. And that then helps anchor how this process is going to go. I think early on in the coaching process, I was probably a little bit too assertive, a little bit too aggressive with then trying to educate the doctrine of and move people forward. And that's something that my wife Carla has been quite good at. We differ in our approaches here, but she's been kind of good at balancing me out a little bit, because she's a psychologist, and psychologists are trained to meet people where they're at and allow people to go through that process at their own speed. And so I've kind of learned to calibrate a little bit better off of her, although we still disagree, because I think a lot of people, myself included, I'm speaking to myself here, if we were just left to our own devices, there's a good chance we probably won't ever move forward. So
see, let's take a little bit of we're good at taking left turns and right turns when we talk, because you just use two words which are key in that you could be assertive and aggressive on that.
Yeah.
But I actually see them as probably from the times we spent together, they're probably your superpowers, mate, in a way. And why do I say that is because you know what, or you have known, this might be changing and maybe it's going to change more as the show goes on. But if we look at who you want to coach and the type of people you want to work with, you're crystal clear. And that doesn't mean, folks, despite Rory's insane ability to swim, to coach swimming, to do endurance sports, you're not looking for the best people all the time. You've got quite a mixed avatar, but you're assertive and aggressive in getting that, because you don't want to waste too much time. You want to know, do you have, because this is what I'm looking for today. Yeah. You're actually, and we've spoken about this before, I think you spoke to the coaches about it, you're interviewing clients to see if they fit your description of a client, which I think is, as I said, mate, I think is actually one of your biggest strengths, because you have such clarity on the type of person you want to work with, because you understand that you have a unique ability to make them better. And you also, I think you understand that you have a unique time frame to make them better.
Yeah.
You have that window if we go back to the start. So I actually think I think it's a positive, mate.
And it led to a great deal of success quite early on.
Yeah.
It comes with its challenges, though. Right. And it's not changing. We chatted briefly about this before, but the way you approach, there is never, and I talk about this when in the context of swimming, right? In the context of swimming, we'll always have a prescription for something, particularly if we're talking technique-wise. It's, I don't know what the right word is, incorrect, for lack of a better description, to assume that the way we go about one thing has absolutely no downside to it, right? There is always a pro and con list. Yeah. Part of the coach's job is to understand what the pros are and what the cons are, and then to balance out, can we deal with the cons later if we sort this out? And I can apply that same, there are pros and cons to the aggressive assertive, to the very tight client profile that we're looking for.
Yeah.
And repeated over time, the con list, at least for me, has started to have a bit of a shake up. And this is why I said it's quite a pertinent topic to me, because right now I'm playing around with right time to pivot a little bit, right time to change direction. But I think ultimately that, kind of to go back to the original, the clarity piece, understanding what your strengths and weakness, where your strengths and weaknesses lie. Understanding what you can and can't do, understanding where your lane lies and where you're outside of your lane, I think is the pathway to mastery. And mastery is something that I'm very interested in. There is depth, but there is, and with depth, how best to explain this? As we go deeper, we start to go narrow, and as we start to go narrow, we start to hone in on specific patterns, specific repeatability, and I'm very interested in those particular details. This has taken a way left.
Yeah, that's great.
But I'm particularly interested in those, and at a point, there's a hesitation in saying this, but I think you'll understand where it's coming from. At a point, you start to see the same patterns repeated, and it's the profile, the narrowness starts to lose the curiosity starts to go down, because you can now see the same patterns repeating over and over again. And you go, okay, now we need to broaden that out a little bit, to get a little bit more curious, to get a little bit wider on what the net looks like.
Is that where you're at?
That is kind of where I'm at. Yeah. And it's a challenging place to be. And to bring this back to the conversation of right time, it's a challenging place to be, because there is a stepping out that's potentially going to happen, and a step into something different. And I'm fortunate, and as I said, I live my life designed simply. So there isn't a whole lot of variables. There isn't a whole lot of complexity. There isn't a whole lot of what ifs. But there is it's probably ego to a degree of, I've got good at doing this. Do I really want to step away from that and risk something else? But then, and so these are the conversations about, for me at least, is it the right time? Yes, it's the right time. No, it's not the right time. That kind of came full circle.
Yeah, all the way around. Let's go back to that, because I actually think it's almost an evolution as well. Yep. You start off, and let's take that funnel. When you're at the broad spectrum of it, to get to the narrow part where you think you want to be, because you think that's where the gold is. And to be honest, that is where the gold is, mate, for a little while. And I like the funnel, and I like coming out the other side and broadening things and increasing curiosity again, because you are, from what I understand, you are quite curious. So why not be curious? It's interesting. But then it comes to a point where, to get into that narrow end of the tunnel, you had to be assertive and aggressive, but the delivery of that assertive and aggressiveness is not always nice.
No. Whereas
perhaps now you can tell someone to fuck off, and they actually think that you're a really good guy. And I think that's one of the, but you know what I mean, mate? Like,
yes.
And if we walk through a real example of this, in coaching, it's like, no, sorry, I don't coach people like you anymore. That's assertive, that's aggressive. But I look at that and I'm like, wow, this guy's actually, you're in that narrow end of the funnel. You know where you're at right now and what you want, and you're so clear. Whereas, and it's actually it's so fresh, because most coaches, when you give them a shout, they'll be like, yeah, I can meet you tomorrow. And the fact that I was with a guy yesterday who said they've tried for 3 days to reach you, I was like, that is amazing. And I could see in his eyes, I said, give it another week and you'll get hold of him. And you could see the desire just grows, because you become, I know it sounds a bit wanky, but you become untouchable in a way.
That, I'll be honest, that doesn't sit well with me. It's true. So I think there's no dancing around it. It's true. I think that it's a hard balance. Part of it is by design. Part of it is not by design.
Yeah.
The part of it that's by design is particularly in endurance sport, but also in swimming, it's a process.
Yeah.
Right? It's a process that requires patience. It's a process that requires dedication. It's a process that requires commitment.
Yeah.
No one goes from having done any endurance work to kind of competing at a high level or doing something that's beyond what their current realm of capacity is right now in the space of 6 weeks or 8 weeks. These journeys take a very long time to build the physical resiliency, to build the mental resiliency, or to build the movement patterns that we need in the water. Mm-hmm. If you send me a message to say, I'd like coaching, and the next day you send another message that says, I'd like coaching, and then the next day you send another message that say, I like coaching. If I give in to you on the fourth day and I respond, you've got your way with getting coaching by forcing the matter and by trying to rush through the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the way you do one thing is not the way you do everything, but there is a reason that cliche is true, exists, is because there is truth.
The hardest phrase to sort of, I hate it, mate. How you do everything is how you do it, or something is everything.
It's not true, but it exists. It's not true. The way I make love to my wife and the way I take out my trash is not the same way. Like the way I wash my dishes and the way I walk my dogs is not the same way.
I'm not trying to picture any of those, mate, but I'm trying to contextualize it. Yeah.
You understand? Like,
absolutely.
But there's a reason why that cliche exists, right? You're demonstrating in a way the way that you're going about this. You're enthusiastic, but you're also rushing through the process. If I remember I worked with a coach a couple of years ago, and it took me maybe a month. I messaged him, he didn't reply. I messaged him again a couple of days later, he didn't reply. I messaged him 2 weeks later that just said, hey, you haven't replied. Either you are completely full, or you're busy, or you're putting me through a process. That's okay. I just want to stay on your radar. It took a month, and then things clicked into place. But and not necessarily modeling off that, but so part of the design of, and it is harsh, it is of making people wait, is that this game that we're playing in endurance and in swimming is a patience game. So if you can't demonstrate that at the start of the journey, we've got a long way to go before.
But mate, I think it's a huge compliment as well, because to me it shows two or three different things. It shows that, let's take this example, and guys, please, if you want swim coaching, if you want help with endurance, reach out to Rory at some stage in 2025. He'll come back to you. I don't want to make it sound like, it's almost like the reverse sales pitch we've got going on here. But when I do reverse engineer it, mate, and someone will say to me, I want to have a coffee with you. I need time to think about it.
Yeah.
And I don't have the busiest life, but I have certain things that I plan in advance, and people are like, why can't you meet this week? And I've been very open about it on the show and in all of whatever I do, that since the day dot, I'll plan my week basically on the week before, on a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So actually next week, I don't really have many slots.
Yeah.
We were able to do this today at short notice because I had a cancellation. You know what I mean? And it was like you gave me a couple of windows that that you can fit things around in. So I'm almost like, if you want to meet, I need to invest some time to think about what we're going to talk about.
Yeah.
So I need a window within my schedule to do that thinking. I might need to do some research as well. And that takes a little bit of time, but sometimes we may be sort of referred to as arrogant or, otherwise, because, well, everyone can meet, I don't know if a real estate agent's a good example, but generally if you call a real estate agent, you won't get a call back. But a lot of people will, a trainer, they would see you tomorrow. And we've trained ourselves, and you've been through this. You built a successful business here in Dubai. The way that you did things 10 years ago was probably
different.
So different, mate.
Yeah.
Like, you tried to meet those people, and if that meant staying up and sacrificing sleep, But you come to this point, like you said, where you're at the narrow end of the tunnel now, and you're enjoying your success and your hard work and the processes you put in place, that you're looking out and go, okay, where do I want to go with this?
Yeah, I like the way you framed that. I heard something a couple days ago that really, really resonated with me and encapsulates what you've just talked about right now. Growth is the ability to look at your situation today, the problems that you're dealing with today, and recognize that you 2-3 years ago would have begged for those problems. That's growth. So true. That's growth, right? 10 years ago, 8 years ago, whatever it was, would have loved to have an inbox and a WhatsApp that is just full of requests for coaching.
Literally.
And now opening it up, it's like, that's the problem that has to be dealt with today. And that's a really good problem. Yeah. But it's a different set of problems to what I had a couple of years ago. Yeah. And I recognize how blessed I am to be in that situation. Sure. I also can understand the work that was done to get there and appreciate that process. But I like what you said about, hey, can we have a coffee? And you're like, I'm going to need time to think about what we're going to discuss. I may need to research a little bit of what we're going to discuss. That gives insight into the depth of the conversation or the depth of the experience that we're going to have when we have a coffee. And that's just a coffee. Now we take the coaching relationship. That's 1
right?
hour.
We can all leave from.
Right? And I think something that I have a huge amount of respect for with coaches. I don't know that, and part of this comes from my own personal experience, and I'll be careful how I phrase this, but for you, we've had a number of conversations, so I can understand. I've worked with Tom. I don't know that I've had the privilege of working with a lot of coaches around the city. I don't think that coaches always get the appreciation for the amount of good coaches, for the amount of work that actually goes into doing the job. There's transactional, right? So you are paying me, and I appreciate that. I pay you for the services, but the coaching process is a lot more transformational than just simply transactional. And there's a ton of stuff that goes into that transformational process. If you're sitting having a think about what we're going to talk about when we have coffee, right? What are you thinking about as you think about preparing somebody for an ultra or for whatever it is that they're training for, an Ironman or whatever it is that they're training for? There's a lot of thought that goes into that process. And you obviously enjoy it. I enjoy it. It's something that kind of ignites the spark. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. Yeah. At the same time, when some of these ideas, these shiny object outcome or shiny outcome syndrome ideas kind of pop up into somebody's head, and they're like, let's do an Ironman. Yeah. And I'm going, all right, I'm going to put a ton of depth into how we approach this, because your life is not simple. Yeah. Your life is not A plus B equals C. You have variables that you're juggling all over the place. And I know how we're going to have to get you from where you are now to where you're going to go. And we've got to dance around all of the complexity that you have. Yeah. That's not as simple as shoving a set of workouts into your inbox or into your Training Peaks and then going, off you go, good luck. Right. So like there is a great deal of complexity that goes into that. And the deeper that complexity, and I mean, at risk of sounding like there's individualization and there's hyper individualization. So we're talking about individualizing the process for people. That is how we get results. Yeah. Right. And that is how we end up where we end up. Yeah. And dealing with the different set of problems that we have today.
How do you said something before, mate, about, which you didn't say it in this exact word, but it's almost like perception of a coach I want to build on this idea because we've got mics and we've got an audience and we can sell ourselves a bit harder. But the point, like, do you think the general understanding of the population of whether it's a triathlon coach, a swimming coach, CrossFit coach, fitness coach, what do the general population understand the role of that coach to be?
I think that's a really good question, and it's something that I don't have a clear answer for.
Yeah.
As I think it does actually. I think it varies from person to person, and I think a large part of it comes from your experience with the coaching process. Mm-hmm. If you grew up playing under 10 soccer, and one of the dads was the guy that showed up every week on a Saturday morning poor guy. Poor guy.
Don't slam him, mate. He gave everything to that team.
I'm not, absolutely. But what there is a precedent for, if that's the only coaching experience that we've got, it's a group environment. It's a dad who's come in on a Saturday. He's given his absolute best, but he's an accountant, or he's a lawyer, or he's a, he played football at under 15 level, and now he's kind of stepped in to give back to the community. That's the framework that you're operating from when you're looking at a coach, right? The second, so that may be one outlook at it. The second is to look at the other end of the spectrum and go world class, right? They have all the answers, right? You have all the answers. I don't know. I don't need to be engaged in this process further than trying to show up and do what you've told me to do. I ask no questions. I give no feedback. It's all data. You have the answers. Off you go. And like those are two kind of polar opposites, right? I show up for the group session. Somebody throws something on a whiteboard and off we go. Or I come around and I expect that you're going to solve the problem for me because you've gone through this iteration so many times and I don't have any role to play in this. I think those are two opposite ends of the spectrum. It's something that I've wrestled with. Do you have a good answer for this?
Thinking about what you just said, the guy, and this is the thing, the under-10s football coach is giving you something that not many people give you, and that's a shitload of his time.
Yeah.
And I think it depends. So do I have a good answer? I don't know. But I think it depends on what you actually are as an individual, therefore what will resonate. And we've both had clients, mate, that, and this is the beautiful thing I think about our job and about being, what we spoke about earlier, is that you've come from a top-end swimming background. Most people would think that you're elite. You just want to coach the best swimmers in the country or in the world, where actually you're a little bit more open-minded than that and curious. So you have people that are the best swimmers. You have people that have a fear of water, and you have all of these things because they teach you something different, and that's where you've taken your coaching to. And that's sort of where I think, well, that's where I've always tried to put my coaching out. And I've always tried to have, a broad mix of clients. With that broad mix comes someone who wants just to talk. So they just want your time. Yeah. So to them, you have to be that kind of coach. Some of them want a really technical program, be it running, cycling, CrossFit, whatever it is. Some of them are super data driven. Some of them care about microcycles, periodization, the whole thing. So I think it's the ability of the coach to know what they want and then to give it to that person, and for that to be, some of my clients, mate, they love my training and I try and make it fun, but that's probably what I spend 20% of the overall time that I spend on them. Yeah. So I do still think, and that's kind of why I asked the question. I guess it's a little bit of a personal question, is like, I think there is a misunderstanding of what a good, I don't know, are we fitness coaches, mate? Are we life coaches? Are we swimming coaches? I never used to love the word coach. Like, I used to hate it. I never saw myself as a coach. I just saw myself as someone who was doing something that could help others.
Yeah.
You know, but that is a coach.
That is a coach.
Like
yeah.
It's weird, but
I think two things to kind of run off on that.
Yeah.
I love the idea of individualizing the process to some need fun, some need technical, some need whatever it is. That process starts with asking.
Yes.
Right? Learned that from many years of marriage. Mind reading doesn't work very well. And you're going to marry that with the level of self-awareness. So I talked at the beginning about kind of gauging the level of self-awareness that a client has.
Yeah.
If you can ask, what is it that you're looking for, and marry that with the level of self-awareness that they have about themselves, you're going to get a fairly good indication of kind of what's needed and what's necessary.
100%.
So I'd say that's the first thing. The second thing is the coach title. That is something that I have leaned into, that coaching title. But what a lot of people may not know is I had this desire to help people in a much broader spectrum of life from a much younger age.
Right.
So I started coaching and teaching swimming when I was 16, and the reason that I got into that was because I recognized I started swimming late. So I only started competitive swimming when I was 15, which in the world of competitive swimming is way past what would normally be considered a good time to start. I recognize that teaching is one of the most effective ways to learn. And that's probably what I've carried through now into selecting my clients is I want to learn life lessons. Who's going to teach me life lessons?
Yeah.
And that's sort of where that interview process. But that at 16, I started teaching and coaching to learn more about human interaction with the water. And I took the lessons that I learned from the people that I was coaching and applied them to what I was doing in the water, and it accelerated my growth. And so at a very young age, at 15 or 16, I recognized this was what I want to do, but I wanted to make it a much more broader than just sport in general. The problem is that I ran into, at least, the vehicle of helping people get better at life, full stop, doesn't run very far. You need a mechanism through which to teach that. And that's where endurance sports, swim coaching, and that sort of thing became a path for me to. And I've written about this before. I can't remember if I've shared it with you, but I've written about this before. At a point early on, it almost became, I wasn't entirely honest with the clients that I was working with because I knew we were helping them here. I could also see what other work needed to be done because there are certain things, variables that are going to stand in your way from achieving goals that are just outside. And a lot of it isn't technique for your swimming. And so the recognition of what those hurdles were and then the ways to kind of work your way around them. So I do like the word coach. I don't like the word life coach. But what else do you describe somebody who is trying to make people better at life or help people not make people better?
What is the stigma around life coach that you don't like, mate?
That's a good.
This was definitely not in the show notes.
I don't know. I think there is a stigma around it. I think it's been created by anyone can spit cliches and platitudes and give you ideas. Something that I've been playing around with, and they will be effective to varying degrees. I don't know that. I think if you marry life coaching with internet marketing is probably where the stigma has come from. If you marry those two things together.
And a Facebook group.
Yeah. That's probably where the stigma has come from. It still doesn't sit comfortably with me. But you will know, most people who've been through a journey with you will know, most people who've been through a journey with me, there is a lot of life coaching that happens in the context of endurance sport. And so it is a good vehicle for moving people in a direction that they want to go.
So how do you make peace with that? How do you because what we're basically saying is, you said it, swimming is 20% skills, 80% life coaching.
Yeah.
So how are you at peace with that then?
It's a vehicle. Right. I mean, and I had a podcast on this a couple of weeks ago. It's something that I'm trying to work on right now, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. But the idea of goal setting, right, is it's an interesting one. I think James Clear talks about goals having a survivorship bias, right? And we think that goals are the answer to everything. But an Olympic gold medalist had the goal of winning the gold medal. So did the guy who finished 16th at the Olympics, and so did the guy that didn't make the Olympics at Olympic trials. They all had the same goal,
yes,
right? So it's not the goal that differentiates people, right? And if you think back on your life, the number of goals that you've set yourself from a very early age that didn't even get off the ground, never mind succeed, and then the ones that did get off the ground that didn't succeed, it's a very long list. So I sat down and looked at my goals in the same way, and I went, I am shit at setting goals. The goals in me are not particularly good. And that's a harsh judgment to make in the context. But where I'm going with this is what I figured out for myself is that the goals that I've been most successful at are the ones that have filled a human need, one of my needs. And if I make this as simple as possible, we look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Goals that fall in line with a deep need that I am trying to satisfy are much more likely to be achieved. Yeah. Right? So if I can understand the need, most of the time it goes like this: set a goal. Oh, now I know why I set that goal. It's because it's meeting that need. Now I'm meeting the need and getting the goal done. Right? I think the utopia is to be able to recognize the need and then find a vehicle that helps you meet that need. So, i.e., I'm looking for esteem, I'm looking for self-actualization. There are 15 different ways that I could go about the path of achieving that particular need of self-actualization, or building esteem in myself, confidence in myself, or building recognition in a community or whatever. There's many different ways that I could go about this. And I think you could probably attest to this because you've done some crazy stuff. And we go, why did you do that crazy stuff, right? And there was a need that was being met, whatever the level it was at. And I think sometimes it's hard to recognize exactly what level it was at. But no one runs as many marathons as you did just for shits and giggles, right? No one goes around a 400-meter track just for fun, for shits and giggles, right? There's a need that you were trying to meet. There was something underlying that was, and you could have got that need met in so many different ways. You could have gone about it in many, many different ways. You chose that one. And I think, to bring back to your original question, how do I marry it? By looking at, this is the need, this is a vehicle that we can get to meet that need, right? And understanding the kind of why behind somebody is going to step into water, which scares the hell out of them. What's the need that we're trying to meet here? And how much of an impact does that have on other areas of their life?
Which links into the end game, or the ultimate, is purpose.
Yeah.
And if you step one step back from purpose to achieve your purpose, and I think this is what you're saying in a slightly different way, is understanding your decision-making process.
Yeah.
Because that's essentially what we're doing, which is great. I mean, I've linked it to make the show flow a little bit, mate. But when you were talking there, that's essentially, and the way that you're explaining needs is you only understand what the needs are based on a decision-making process. And you can, because it's the same with goals. Like, a goal is the end destination.
Yeah.
And some people are good with macro, so long-term goal. So what is the purpose? Most people, and you said something about rushing into coaching. Most people, they're only rushing into it because they're only conditioned to achieve micro goals. And micro goals is just, it's dopamine and it's getting it done today. I have to, by the end of today, have an answer from this swim coach, so I'm going to call him 15 times. You know, that's the way. But when we go longer, and I think this is what I'm constantly learning, is lots of people can play very well on the micro side. They can do the rushing that you spoke about, but on the macro side is purpose and is decision.
Yeah.
And one back from that is decision. So the question that I actually had written, which links in quite well to this, is what is your decision-making process? Because I also think this is a link to the title of The Right Time. So what I'm asking you now, mate, is how you actually make decisions. Like you're talking about meeting those needs. How do you come to a point where, and you gave a good example, like how do I come to that point where I want to run those marathons? How do you come to the point? How have you formulated this decision-making process? And is it constantly under review?
Yes, it's constantly under review. And I think that's part of I am introverted to a large degree. I'm introverted. I spend a lot of time in my own head, which has a lot of pros and it has a lot of cons to it. There is don't get me wrong. The thinking process is not all sunshine and rainbows, but it marries quite well with endurance sport. It marries very well with time in the water because there is no distractions. No one can text you. No one can call you. No one can you are by yourself. And it's sensory deprivation to a degree. And so I'm fortunate that my swim capacity and swim technique allows me to a degree to be able to switch off. I can still hit intensity. I can still roll through workouts that have some complexity to them without being, without having to have that switched on level of attention. There are moments and times when I need that, but so there is a lot of reflection and that it is constantly under review. In terms of how you make those, how you come to those decisions, I think iterating is probably the first one. It's trying a few things with a small cost and figuring out what applies best or what suits best, what works best. It's having an honest conversation about what you actually enjoy. And I think this is hard for people to be honest with themselves about what you actually enjoy. And I think if you can understand what you enjoy, you can find a few avenues for that and iterate on them at a small level. Go through the process a couple of times and then reflect on it. You start to gain a picture. That's the first way that I would. The second is to reference periods of your life, and I like this one. Reference periods of your life where things have worked really well, right? And so you go back and you look at what was the context, what was I trying to achieve, what states, what was my physical environment like, what was my emotional state like, what were my relationships like, what did my day look like as it flowed through, and go, what were the variables involved in that made that time special or stand out to me as I think in this moment. And then what options do I have available to me right now to find that same rhythm and that same flow? What sports, what outlets, what people help me go through that? And I think those two are kind of with constant reflection. I've started to write a lot more again because that reflection process gains a lot more clarity when I'm writing. Thoughts morph, feelings morph, they change, they evolve constantly. But when it goes down on a piece of paper, it becomes a lot more tangible, and you have structure and boundaries to it that helps you process a little bit more. And I think that helps. And then having somebody to talk to, having my wife is that person for me, and we've been together for 18 years. So that's a significant amount of time that she's seen cycles of up and down and all sorts of places in the middle. But does this resonate? Asking the question once I've decided, does this resonate with something that I've are you getting the same vibe as I'm getting? And because of 18 years of good communication, not perfect, but good communication together, she is a good sounding board for me on that. And I think that also helps. But I think one of the biggest things that I've wrestled with in life is that, try not to get existential here, but one of the hardest parts to living life is recognizing that you only get one, and there are consequences to the decisions that you make, and there is a limited number of decisions that you have to make. And I think if you spend too much time, which I have done in the past, thinking about that, you get paralyzed into not making any decisions because you want to make the decisions that you do make count for the most. But sitting in a place of paralysis and not doing anything is no way to live a life that's worth living.
Yeah.
If it was easy and we could box it up.
I was just about to say, mate, you've done I'm making notes on the points and stuff. When you look at them, and you've done a pretty good job. I think a lot of people will be quite silenced by what you said over the last 2 or 3 minutes, man. I mean, you've done, and this almost leads as well to creating almost this state which isn't a flow state. Most of the time we see a flow state as achieved in sport, especially coming from a sports background where it's just, there is nothing else. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's some great quotes about it. It's when nothing else matters. There's no ego. There's nothing. You're literally just there. Then what's the decision-making process? Because it's just you in your rawest form, and it's these things that you said, the overthinking, the underthinking, the how do I actually get all this out there and align it? Whereas in those times and this should be, I really want to, like a lot of people say about sport, that's where you find, actually, I believe that we find a flow state in our daily lives if we're like, and you're just there and it's just so pure.
Yeah. I think when we typically think about flow states, I don't know, there is research done on this. I'm not 100% familiar on the research. So when we typically talk about flow states, we talk about smaller chunks of time. And when I say smaller chunks of time, you could be in flow for the entirety of an ultra or for an Ironman, unlikely, but possible. So we could be talking hours and hours on end. But I think for most people, when we sit down and we think flow state, it's for a micro period of time. Yes. If I zoom out, I think I can identify maybe 2 or 3 times, I'm 36. I can identify 2 or 3 times in the last 36 years where my flow state has probably lasted for months or a year. And I would say that like 2011 for me was a flow state in swimming. Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't forcing it. My body was responding and adapting to everything. My routine was so tightly dialed in that I didn't have to think about what I was going to do next, what the next work, like it was show up, execute, recover, show up, execute, recover. And that wasn't a 1 week, 2 week thing. Now, obviously the mind has the capacity to suppress some of the harder stuff that happened during that time, but I can identify as a full block. I can go back to kind of 2018 and the coaching process. I was coaching, I always get nervous about admitting this, but I was coaching close to 40 hours on deck a week. We're doing 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the evening, which sounds like a crazy amount, but I was literally like a sponge. I was watching different people move through the water in different ways to respond to different stimuluses, saying the same thing 1,000 different ways and watching which one turned a light bulb on.
You weren't just coaching.
No.
It was so much more.
And that was a process. Like, how do you explain having the energy to do that over that period of time other than by being, 100%. I was in a flow state for an extended period. Now, there's a cost to that, right? We don't have an endless reserve of energy that we can tap into, and that's a finite thing. Yeah. I think there's also potentially, life is not it shouldn't be one long flow state. It's not going to be one long flow state. Yeah. And I think something that has come up again and again for me is one of the ways we can trigger flow states is through routine, right? It's through stacking micro things together that kind of lead us in. Too much of a reliance on that sequence of events actually leads to a loss of resiliency, because when something falls away in that stack, in that sequence that puts you in, you cannot execute. Yeah. And if you want the ability to execute when it counts, you need to be able to do it regardless of whether that stack is there. And so having moments or periods when you are actually fighting outside of flow states, I think is actually quite a valuable process for people to go into. Yeah. That may go over some people's heads if they've never experienced the opportunity to be in flow for a long time, but it is something that I've recognized with myself, like trying to optimize everything all the time.
Yeah.
And trying to have everything flow beautifully all the time doesn't make you as good as you could potentially be.
Could you go back to 40 hours a week coaching on the side of the pool?
On the side of the pool, if I was learning Spanish or Portuguese and trying to
teaching in Spanish,
like if I was trying to learn, like if that was something that I wanted to do and I was like, I was super passionate about that and I needed to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe. Swimming is a technique limited sport. Right. Everything I say, everything I teach, it comes back to, it's life. It comes back to fundamentals, right? And once you have a grasp on the fundamentals, I think this is where what you've kind of described with the podcast, like once you've got a grasp on the fundamentals, you start to go into esoteric and existential and like off stuff, because there's only so many ways you can repeat the fundamentals. Yeah. So could I go back to coach? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I never want to shut myself off to opportunities, but probably not. I would ask myself, what's the need I'm trying to meet by doing that?
Yeah.
And then I would go, what are the options of meeting that need? And I don't think that's the most appropriate option to meeting that need.
So there was a right time or a right window.
Yeah. 100%. Here's the last thing that I thought. I don't know how much more we've got to chat about. But
I've gone all day, to be honest. I'm having a great time, but I always respect your time.
One of the things that came into my mind, and it's not, I'm going to try and say this as elegantly as I can. It's not as refined as it could be if I'd written it out a few times and iterated on it. But if you think about, you ever played Tetris? Do you remember playing Tetris?
I do.
If you think about every time you get one of those lines to line up and everything lines up and you get the points and the blocks floor, that's the right time.
Yeah.
Right. But when as that game goes on and these blocks of experience and these blocks of variables and these blocks of craziness in your life start to stack up.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it's quite easy to get those lines all lined up. Then you start to get a small gap here and a weird thing here and a small gap here. And as those blocks build up in weird patterns, it becomes harder and harder to get that line to all line up. And I think if I had to draw a picture of what the right time looks like, it would be the moment when we've managed to get the L shape, the block, and the T all to somehow hit on top of all these weird gaps that sit underneath it, and it clicks into place. And I think there are moments in time where those variables do fall. Yeah. I don't know how much control we have over all of the variables that allow for that to happen.
For sure.
But there was a right time for the swimming. And like I said earlier, I started when I was 16. I only ended when I was 26. Yeah. Most people start when they're 6 and end when they're 16. But if you look at the maturity of a male athlete, we don't hit it until we're 26. So the right time for me was that later start. Yeah. I happened to get injured in 2018, and I couldn't train a whole lot, which allowed me to put 40 hours of work in. Right time. Right? Yeah. And so you have these moments in your life. I don't know that we can force them. No. But things line up, and that makes it the right time.
What a lovely point to finish on. I mean, I have one more question.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer it. We can finish there. But you said from the start that the timing of the topic is good. We've said that we've changed the funnel. So my last question is, where are you going now?
That's a very good question. I will answer it with no sort of definitive answer, because as you pointed out in the beginning, with the swim coaching, I was very clear. Yeah. And I have been very clear. This is still not very clear, which is why I'm dancing in and out. Yeah. I have curiosity around the endurance piece of triathlon, because there are a lot more variables involved in in helping people navigate the complexity of life with training. It's not as simple as the swim coaching, which is a very closed system environment. We get in, this is how we execute. There's only A, B, and C, and we're going to find one of these ways that work for you, and we're going to kind of iterate around that. When we look at triathlon as a whole, or endurance sport as a whole, especially when there are 3 sports involved, there's a lot more complexity, and I'm interested in figuring out how that can work. At the same time, I am very interested in helping coaches learn to be better coaches. And you may have gone through this process. I have done all sorts of qualifications and certifications on a large level. I will be completely honest, almost all of them were in an effort to tick a box that needed to be ticked.
Totally.
They gave me some level of insight, but probably the biggest problem that I've faced in the last 10 years on a personal level is finding a mentor that was 2, 3, 4 years ahead of me, that could tell me, not give me the answer, but give me some insight into here's where this is going. Here's what you're running up against. Just on the other side of this is good stuff. You're wasting your time in this direction. Those sorts of details I would have paid anything for 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, I'm the same, mate.
And I have a deep curiosity about building systems that could help that process.
I hope you find the coaches that were you 5 years ago.
Yeah.
Because that's the key, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very simplistic statement, but in reality, it's because coaching is changing.
Yeah.
And why people coach is changing. It's all linked to what we've been talking about: purpose, decision-making process, right time, right place, what's the need, what's the pain point, all of these different things. But the type of people that are in coaching changes. You'll take care of that. I'll take care of changing people's perception of what a coach is. And in a few years, we should have some really good clients and some really great coaches.
We should be able to bring it back together.
I'm not sure whose job is going to be hardest, but we'll share notes. Mate, I really appreciate it. That's a solid hour of different thoughts. I encourage you folks, I will put some links to what Rory does and to his site and stuff in the show notes. Go and have a look. You started a podcast.
Yeah.
So you're sharing, I was happy for you, mate, because I think about 6 or 8 months ago, and like we've seen today, you have a lot of super interesting thoughts, and you were such a swimmer about them. You're so selfish with them. And now you've started putting more stuff out into the world. So some of it is heavy, folks, like a few of those 3 or 4 minute bits where Rory just spoke then. But mate, I think it's awesome what you're doing. I'll link to it in the show notes, and I appreciate the energy and the thoughts of today, mate.
Well, thank you for having me. And if you've managed to follow the train of thought to this point, I do appreciate you. You're a good human being.
I need to go through my notes.